To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one ungone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God to bliss, nor of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans to the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the three worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With a supreme science, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the three worlds are not, incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is beside thou. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash, a lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kambhiryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
You better.
Jason.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's not in the car language. Oh, yeah, that's in the car, sorry. Chitunga bachim besong lerwa. Le so yo a chui chuburchins, ra. Le so yo a chui chuburchins. Newton jibwe chewa tembatans. 시외 시수 류단 쯤마신 간나렌데 치신 장발라스 예바 템분이네 예배소 다시 차원은 저 뽕하다 계속 타다 주버시벌 따도 받았는데 마친 일로서 류소요와 추이초르셨어 말아줘 류단 소어서도 류스는 소스 소부체 소스리단 류단 셈니 만져서 수 내통계게 영어부터리아 소스거다 그래서 요아시리다 그 메다바 당분간시 대그 말해서 그 윤두그래서 거라 요아시다 그래서 요아 주의 주부시 때 빼자르도 잡아당서나 내사갈 축히 되어라 이말 잡아당도자네 야 잡아 맞출로 잡는데 문부대 주의 주부시라 부부도 신주신주만 뭐 정거라 그 슉되게 아니 추나랴 문부된데 주부르시라 신주신주된 꼬레를 껴냐 예로도 주의 주부르시라 그래서 요와 주의 주부르시면서 유도 집에서 요번 집으로 게래서 거라 말아서 류다 속한가 야 유도 집에서는 류다 셈니데 가간도 샤거라 소직선은 류다 셈니 가간도 샤거라 얘네는 치와서 거다 유도 집에 치와점 바탕스 딩아라서 남준네티 소소 류다 소데 딱바 템바로지 시부지 인삼사 탁부지 삼르타에 매송 거라 고개지께지긴 주로네 다르르도 소니 님돈 저와데 체두그레세 소된지두그레송 거라 빼나 추추부르나시레스 추추부르데 잡아탄두산 오데 사체 추요라 까네마 잡아탄데 대슈기고 문부르버시 또서 깨용거리데 이나 코코르라 캡신 조바 대슈디에서 지루라 어디나시레송 거다 소요와 추추부르시스 야 디질람나 두두두두 잠깐만
No, no. So here to begin with, as is taught by Je Lama Tsongkhapa, this life and body that we have right now are like sort of wavering, impermanent, like a water bubble. It's something that is quickly destroyed. So we should recollect the fact that we are going to have to die. And having died, we will follow after our sort of white and black karma in the way that a shadow follows after the body. So finding stable certainty in that, it says, please bless me to accomplish all positive virtuous actions, avoid all negative actions, and always be endowed with conscientiousness or awareness. So here, as it explains in this first line, our body, the sort of form that we have, as well as our life, the kind of the conjoined body and mind, when our body and mind exist in this kind of conjoined state, that's our life. These are impermanent. They're sort of wavering, subject to, by their very nature, impermanence and disintegration. So they're sort of like water bubbles. Like we can imagine when it rains and there are kind of puddles of water and more raindrops are dropping down, and it creates these little bubbles of air, or sort of bubbles on that water. They are very temporary. They sort of come up and then are dispersed very quickly. And so our body, our life are like that as well. Although we have this sort of sense that they are stable and lasting, this is actually something, as the verse continues, that is quickly destroyed. We are subject to having to die. We can't have this body forever. So death being the point at which this body and mind separate, we have to cast off this kind of life. And so again, this is describing the sort of situation that we have with this life that we have right now. Our body and our life are things that are impermanent, sort of like these little water bubbles that come up in a time where the rain is pouring down, and you can get these little sort of accumulation of bubbles, but they are going to quickly disperse. Our body too, our body and our life are something like that. We should recollect the fact that we are going to have to die.
뭐야 요소 요와 추이추시 유도 집에 치와 템바 나서도 어니 소되게 류다 셈미 콜레지도 수 내주거래 뒤에는 너버 조선에 치와서 되는 거 알아 류다 셈 가간도 샤거다 유도 집에 치와 템바 나서 어디 양내 양동아서 템고래 서시와 시베 제수다 제일 가려 연구에서나 배트네 자원에 르 균체 심 균체 가게 맹게 작마도 르 고란 균데 붙이야 풍부시에 로가 연구래 뒤균튼도 그래 이 셈데야 고란 심 참무체 미 르레 템베 셈기 나주다 초라다 두시다 tuzu 강급파 매샤니야 심 고란 세시르바 참모지 모제제가 고란 균튼이 로샤 그래서 오라 요즘 집에 쉬어지서 르드 좀 마시 까나랜데 시외 제소 르드 좀 마시 까나랜데 셰시 타올 디 제소 르드 셈미가 균소소소 로샤고라 시외 제소 르드 좀 마시서 네 소소 르다 르지 좀 어르지 감나니 르드 좀 용거로 파줘데 좀나 용거로 르드 좀 마시서 르데 가반도나 때다 냠도 쯤마딘 쯤나디 냠도 용거로 쉬쉬 르데 쯤마 까나가 레니 부데다 소소 냠도 용거레스 거라 르데 쯤마시 까나랜데 최신 장발라스 레 카르보케 쇼다 네 티페쇼 카르체네 띵아 주 셈기 제바선자 셈기 텐도 네바디 테데 와르노 되네 띵아라주 냠도 교와치마 셈데다 냠도 살아 도시 두레스 거라 간나 렌데스 카르볼레 샹라 차와 빵바 로 교와추 나불레 샹라 차와 티빵바 카르벨레 로 네틴도서 교와추 소치바 판데 소초바 세라 로 마심바 렘바 판 심바 동아세라 로옌 판데 추좀 소아세라 근데 우리가 시위치도 르다도 까나는데 셰시 장발라 이거 템포니에서 어떻게 시 템포니에네 소소 집에 지어서야 소소다 냠도 기디길에 이부터 냠도 누구 삼때 시 템포니에 받쳐 그래서 그거라 현다 소소 냠도 동에서 요 말와 소소 르데 소소 셈당 소소다 가가신 로사래 아니 노론제 얘니들서 봐 강냠도 저에게 요 말아 강냠도 요데 가르시니 레 셈길레 개와체나 기회사베 박샤디 냠도 요라 미게웰레 사이네 미게웰레 박샤 레 기디길레 니부데 소스냠도 두레 송고도 야
So here again, this life and body are impermanent, like a water bubble. They are quickly destroyed, and so we should recall death. We should think about death again and again. Again, death being that time when this body and mind that have been abiding together, those separate. And we should recall that it's not the case that after death, the continuity of the sort of form of our body is cut, or that our mental continuum is cut. The continuity of those will continue on. Our form changes state and goes this sort of separated from the mind, but the mind too will continue on. It's not the case that once we die, those continuums are cut. So here, as it continues, it says, after death, we will follow on our black and white karma, the way a shadow follows the body. So when you have, again, at the time of death, and the body and mind are separated, the body, the sort of matter, will continue in its own continuum. And so too with the mind, although the more coarse sort of feelings and conceptualizations have subsided, there's that very subtle, clear light mind that is going to continue on. And the sort of after death, that mind will follow after our black and white karma, the way that a shadow follows the body. When you have the sunlight and your body and it casts a shadow, wherever your body goes, that shadow is going to follow. And so too, this mind will follow after the kind of white, those positive, good, virtuous karmas we have created, or those black, negative karmas that we have created. So if we have accumulated actions of abandoning, harming others, those sorts of positive, virtuous actions that are the opposite of the 10 non-virtuous actions. So instead of killing, we protect life, or instead of sexual misconduct, we hold to ethical conduct and so forth. If we, those are the sort of actions that will determine where we can go. So here we should find find a strong kind of certainty that this is the case. After we die, there's nothing else that we can take with us. The body is separated away. We can't have that. We don't have any sort of wealth or possession that we can take with us, no family or friends or anyone else. But instead, all we have are the sort of seeds, those imprints, the latencies of those positive and negative actions that we have created in the past. And we should have strong certainty in this.
Oh, yeah. Niba tempo nyene sierra. Yele ngeshi tempo nyeba shele. Niba tempo nyene. Nibe so tashi chawa namje ponga ta sierra. Nakbu le degi. Ranyam do yunge nakbu le degi karchi gorsana. Miki wachu shenla tsewa. Lunga yusum yikwane. Shenla tsewa cheba terwa. O di niba cheshu degi. Nyawala kigres. Dung degi yida. Yang batigene tanduli chigres kuchigres gora ane teach miki wachu di papa di dosho ane kewachu di chini vituba ina ne lada me kyo sangbu togure songora sa rage maomba yung ju kewati kudi karna ke le sange nibutire songora niba tembu nyene nibe so trashi chawana yiponda nibe so de le nagbu tozu songora no Shenla tsewe le nakbu le tozu kanga paapaan kurese. Nibe so tashi chawa nam yapongwa das. Miki wachu tashi chawa ne rwa kulung yanche ne paa maki wache pangbo tabshi chigoro esi meche nar sugora. Kiso tada chubar chebala sute miki wachu di paa ne ten doso ki ke wachu di ene tuyeliya besu chigoro esi ya. Chachane ponda keso tada tu keso tada so karbule de sungora karbule kewachula soba keso tada tu barche bala tado padan demba chingil so kewachima soso kewasang budang nembo topji ke kuti rese o tezo kanga megewachu de papa chendelia ene kewachu de chine ke tup mao bana ya kewangeba mele sangbuche le kyulia tipun kitu tsushin du chigi sam itoliane kewa thoma chen de samai ba kewa thoma me bane tikba mabusa yore tezu kangale shakba chen gyosemche cha cha wa ta cheba pewa tongsha dambala soba o tendre chagore songudwa ya.
So finding strong certainty in that we are going to follow after our kind of black and white karmas. The verse continues saying that we should then abandon even the most kind of subtle of faults. So anything on the 10 non-virtues, anything that causes harm to others with our body, speech, and mind, the sort of most heavy actions leading to a birth, negative actions leading to a birth in the hell realms, the sort of medium leading to a birth as a hungry ghost, and the sort of lighter leading to a birth as an animal. Instead, we should be accumulating all positive actions, the kind of opposite of those 10 non-virtues, recognizing that the future life that we take, again, if we find this kind of stable ascertainment or certainty that this is what our future rebirth, the life we are going to take is dependent upon, then we will really make effort to abandon even the most subtle kind of negative actions or faulty actions from the very intention to cause harm to another, and will make effort to accumulate all kinds of virtuous actions, those white or those positive sorts of actions of the 10 non-virtues, the 10 virtues and so forth. So here we're saying in this verse, expressing in this verse, the desire to always have kind of conscientiousness or awareness, to avoid any sort of negative actions from the very smallest ones, and to make that kind of effort to accomplish those positive actions that will lead to a good rebirth in the future. And along with this, we should have the recognition that since we have taken countless rebirths in the past, we have so too accumulated many previous non-virtuous actions, and taking the time to generate a kind of regret for those actions and engage in purification, along with the sort of practices of accumulating virtue through things like prostrations and offerings and so forth. This is the way in which we use this kind of recognition of death and impermanence, along with the sort of certainty in karma, to really make an effort at these actions.
Oh yeah, diko. Tado padan demba chenji lobsong gudwa. Oh, dene tado mechi dina sosu nima tagbari singu yordo. 바위 단단바 신기랍스도 바위 바시도자 저좀 미게 자와 샬라 차와라 소부터 참미로 아삼 기와도 두고요 삼체 섭섭체체 바위 바로 랑도체 어디 중마르 디롱그리 삼사 섭섭체네네 근데 송통배실래 나 규르지 냠도 근데 규르와 안에 람바 산제 장주 sembal라 소바테다가 진기 롭시에세 야 최년발을 때네 근데 규르지 진기 롭시에세 덤바 산제 좀 된데 깔을 태바체네 근데 규르지 삼고래 송구도 야
So then this verse ends with saying, please bless me to always have conscientiousness, this kind of awareness on a daily basis, being aware of the kinds of actions that we are engaging in. This kind of a conscientiousness is knowing what is a not suitable action, what is a suitable action, having in one's mind what is, and being careful of with respect to the kinds of things that we should adopt, that we should put into practice, and those things that we should avoid. And so here, by listening to the teachings, we should be requesting, may I have the blessings to create that kind of transformation wherein I have this sort of awareness. By listening to the teachings, may I be able to practice this on a regular basis.
Oh yeah. Oh, they call make you this one. Oh yeah, make you what you pa. What you troop. 개와주 두에데 제부 남미긴 제부스라 제부 체슈데 넘버 멤버 마오바네 건 제바데 아니 내송송다 사다 미케와라 소보용 거너 기디길레니 이네 첸델이야 소소 단다 제거라 소치바 파 마침발림바 파 로옌파 쳔바 타마파 치주파 테주파 빵바이나 소소레 첸델이 기바요르노 nang mi so yin da ka ga de nyok da nyu che che mi sang bo ji che che me si ke tu gyo ra ti che ne so so che de ya tha do da nga ye dan den sim da tin de ke ku yo ma ra su su me si de so so ya bo ji ke chu den ba che che ke yo ra yin de ko pen do de che de le yo ra do ra le pen gyo re shan le pen gyo re yin de bu number me ba de ma ba ne ong re so gyo ra o ti yin du kar so re 저 치마 찍고 있던다 남미긴 데부 쪼데 치마들이 마도 단다 소소 레데 단다 첸들 싸고 싸게 열어 첸들 싸도자 랑긴 링아 예송기 권에 껴도 봐 겨도 주대비나 소소 기버에 남미데 강가 지조 냠도 로디치에다 강가리아 대시 기버 쇼용 거도 소소 셈벨 흘르지 대쇼거도 어디 손자 내가 되어 푸스 펜바세 봐 ambizione tomarkewa partokewa tamarkewa saanashi tambon gochon mezi dele pengere teikewa chema te kyonchone pengerese oti sungudwa ya.
So here, the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and adopting virtuous actions, doing things like these will bring about their kind of ripening results in our future lives. So by avoiding killing and sexual misconduct and stealing and lying and so forth, we are creating the kind of causes for a good ripening result, of a rebirth as a human or a god in the future. But even aside from that, those kinds of results that will come in the future, even in this life, we will be much happier if we put these kinds of things into practice. If we are not driven in our motivations by jealousy and pride and anger and so forth, this is going to allow us to be happier right now in the temporary, like in the short term. Whereas the ripening result will that's the main thing that maybe we're focused on in terms of our practice. We should also recognize that getting rid of those kinds of faults of body, speech, and mind, that's something that will bring benefit. It said that, bringing a sort of temporary benefit as well as that kind of long-term sort of benefit. So here, the Dharma is often explained as being virtuous at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And so here, again, even if our focus is on the kind of ripening results that practice will bring, this abandoning non-virtue will bring us happiness in this life as well. We'll be able to be more peaceful and harmonious and so forth with those around us.
뭐 다든다고 소소 메시지에 단들 lab고 도와 쳐서도 저 두딱도 땡게 말해서 소다 소소류다 소도도 지루레스도 신나고요 말아 다 소소 지버치도 기그라 시에 삼을던데 마데데 용거다 통마데 용거와 이나 지버고에 던달이야 시에요 말해 와 센데 메제게나 결로도 또 시케네 아니 야가요 란다 시에 팬도요 센데다 교와 지만나서 팬도요 레스티시요 소소 메시게다데 디셰디자코 신나고에 던달 말해 기레왕고네 가서 하고되도 소소 페지 메시지 뜻다도 스테 마로 테 하고되라 소소 밤에 미랑가마 누구 제 치마 요구 제 딩고 숨레데도 이 신나게 그 말때 뭐네 시티라 어쩌자고 직발 가셔야 치와다 텐데 깨지셔나 밀리시나고 그레스 두고 할수도 지단데 술라 치와세 다들 소소 딱이란 식으로서는 sembatevo mardo ti samltandi miki ba yongure chara ina ko di kom sona tu ta tu tenge me sam nangmi suena takbare shiduste me sam imaji kha dre sambene chamba da yaga yongora tu ta tu tenge me sam na kar soda o tene ti ko kha dre sam di tezi ringali ya bo chite se de koko yara e duste marda stejiringa chawa pemba tu yakbu che timbu che te imaje kaga dre ta choje ura ase ura o ti diko jikba pae ga tandalia tawdo tenge mare ta se duba meta kware ta se sakba meta kware ta se so meta kware ta se lo chunju di meta kware ta ke ru ta se ti shete o maamba na tende yuria samde so semlia yuando guardo so semlia yuando guardo o ti du karsora pechena yungdo chunjutuna kala chu nyam semba kala ngebar yochoba teni jigba yongda de chidala kala juse o tende samlo konge media tu ta tu tenge mare samna mena kanga di meda baran juacha re samnena yering bu samlo tan thongbe chena ne ko meche de yakboji kegra shala chwa pa chini phamba tu nangmine gochu ne sangmalya tende ji meche ke duza ane ko jig me go ba chagre shanda de kan le jig me chida la jig me shiwa le jig ma de chara ko meche yakboji ke de samgra ata meche yakboji ke de tikba samme kewa yakbo tuye choso ta degre sam chida ko machine me suji te ke yo mara kora rang shin ri ba tili ko je ke yo mara tanda ko de jin ga sudab ke yo mara 자, 그 직분 매바 차기가래. 로 대보차. 좋아. 어떤 기본 매섬 매실이야 득버시다 사 매섬 개와진이 그스트에 총송섬. 어디 등한지 이제나 용도 최바랍디 시월라 가시다 갱고 차수는 시월라 가시래. 랍디 그 기본 매바다. 시월에 천나 매바. 기본 매바다. 매지 아버지 깨리 인상 남이 주된 냠도 있는데 지소리 있는데 아버지 깨리 삼제 심len 여바라 매버지 대부지 시에요도 러시아요도 어디 매네 다이쇼 뭐야 어디 주도 안돼서 마다서 맞아
So here, the reason for discussing and talking about the fact that one will not remain forever. Now, some thinking about this way in which we take birth and we have to die and so forth might think that it is to make one afraid or to make you sort of scared. But really, it's not about creating fear in one. Rather, it's in order to appreciate the kind of life that we have now by thinking about the sort of impermanence, the fact that we aren't going to remain forever. It makes us act in ways that are beneficial both to ourselves and to others. So here, it's not, of course, when we bring up the kind of word death or the concept of death, there's some sort of unhappiness that arises in our mind that we have to separate from this body and so forth. And so this is something that, however, we can see death around us directly. Like we can see that no generations of our family from the past past remain. Everybody has to face this kind of fact of death. And so there are, again, some that when they hear these teachings, they sort of feel sort of discomfort at hearing about death. But when we recognize that we are not going to remain forever, of course, there's going to be some sort of sense of unhappiness, but it also leads us to make good use of the kind of life that we have, to be more loving and to generate more positive attitudes and so forth. We think, well, I need to do the Dharma right now while I have this kind of opportunity. And so it is by thinking about impermanence and death and the fact that our life will not remain forever that can kind of create a change in our mind. When we are able to recognize that we are impermanent, that we are not going to remain forever, then we will use our life in a sort of positive way. We will value that and take advantage of it in a way that when we get to the point of death, then one doesn't have to feel that kind of fear. If you have throughout your life acted in a way where you know that you have avoided negative actions for the most part, you have tried to accumulate positive actions, then at that time of death, you don't have to have that kind of fear or regret or trepidation. So reflecting upon death and impermanence during one's life can help make it more meaningful and also create the kind of change that allows one to be at peace at death. It is said that of the sort of very best practitioners actually feel a joy at the time of death. The sort of middling practitioners can die without regret, thinking like, I have done well throughout my life. And at the very least, someone can die without a sense of fear, knowing that they have used their life in a kind of meaningful way. So again, talking about death and impermanence is not to create fear or scare you, but rather to actually alleviate that at the actual time of death.
Oh, that in this some done. Junako hearing book, you watch him, and this some tande. So would I come to do it? Tanga never shall get some sign jigba dungu marwa, da cheben jigba sigura. I never shall get some jiggy or a marcha. Never shall you mare. Lutan Simkin Drawach and the Simdi Tramoche, Kiwana and Chimon Rosha Yora. The Kiwana Kioma Yaketan, Yadre do some somebody. She does not tongue and never shall get some assembly on Gio Mare. Chima de Yabuji language Margaret, some called Giorto. So called it Tao Cheb and Chipa, Kunchi and do some Chiba on Gio Mare. Kiwachima de Carche or some Titolia, Gina da Carsore subsochi with some code mato. Or do Carsora. Chukelen, Kiwachima Yoba, the Kellen Geshina, T. some Lordo. That case, Kiwachima Drea, Maru, somebody in there. Eating on to Luda, some Yakagachi machine. Ludi Janjan let us some doing it, Ludi there, let it do Tachima Dogesu or some Tangiora. Or Dico Kiwachima came a language in a Shala saw upon Pemba to Namidinam do Tungure, Chisos and Yam do Tungur Messicura. Tambachi Gogo Tam, the Shala saw Machin Berlin Kanji Majuchen, Messikiwa Yomarwa. The Kiwachima came Malinaya. Messidi, Shala saw upon Beconachini Pemba to Messidi Yaro Sunday Chikavina. Coach came Malinet and that sure it or the Chudden Chuma in Banigana sure it or a Koran going as she use some Kemalina. May some train Yomar, never touch you a Yomara. You ever do not under Yichi Mason at Dembarwa. Never is in a male country Hakosone. Never ke Hako Yomara, Sheo Matanda Togo Marmado, Matochina Meva Michera. Being Missawa, Pena Mimisawa, Tuachu Metoshicera. Miss Ever Mena Tuachu Genitomedo, China Yora, Tongo Mara. Taku to a Mendoza Tache Shomara. Kuramatora Matachu. Indico, Kiwachima Yoba Hamagucho, Kiwachima Yobali Chime. Ra. The Meva race is a Meva Leichi Yomargo, Yoba Hamaguza, Yobalichi Messora, Meva machines and Meva Leichi to Ekeomara. Or Tinducar soda. Tindu some going a shit and shoot, Tindu Cameligachina. Oh, the boom Kituti, Yahuchi Chevenes, Susembesity, Yagata, Chut and Dal Church at the Ordo. Oh, Tinducar soda. Oh, Tenik Joachima Sambu, Joang Butcher, Samuta. 대자 많이 봐 내손에 타러서 많이 봐 아니 하다 미껴와 돼야 동해지랑 신신이 삼 주나 코야래 타러시고 코에 동해래 타러시고 와 코에 동해선 가르치고 그랬으니 녀몽 그 착당 교환게 레사 아니 대왕게 교랑 그냥 풍부 도르제 기시시고 라라 라와 매버체 소소레 냠버서 개와사 가르유네 대왕게 라와 매버 기시시고 풍부 돌렌시고 봐 미 풍부를 실라야 되셔야 던르셔야 또또 레들 코라시고라 동해시 과 동해지랑 신체레스 딜레 타르바체고 삼 딜레 타에 던달이야네 세바방구요도 현다 가지 쉐드나 조 세바시그라 세다 젤라 양시 매쳐라 세바데다 제스나니 양시발레야 요마레 그래서 세바 개바 세바 구바 렘바세그바 세바드 매네 차바 요마레 차시데 매네 콘도 요마레 차당이 빠도요레 디에샤네 세바방구레스네 디요라 세바방게 예섬 차신데 나주 콘조세 차당에 코세 차다데 요르 따야데 타르바토에 람두거다 다 디탈이야 친신나 차당 요사데 가르스네 디땅징게 요레스 네 다메세데 다음에 봐도 동반이 또 보세요 요거다 어디인데 세바방고삼 세베주데네 다돈 짐바데nga samrawa yeban지마 딩안진데 방고요 삼프로와 다음에 또네 어딘데시네 타르바토바샤고요삼 라지부 타르바토는 디마레삼 셴 파마 쳔베로와 심제 셴 란다 송바테완들 동에 메도가레 대창마에 랑기 랑웨네로 소송웨네 셴리아 판도체 통계치 제고레 삼제 근데 뒤에 전달이야 랑게 단단에 세바 빵가도 콘도 빵가 감투체 차당이 부들어와 네 당진이 생아 좀 시부지 연하셔야 돼봐 총으로다 어딘데시니 렘비니 타르바토바샤고 삼샤야 뒤에 전달이야 랑께 군세 연대 군대신교 단다게 랑 토고요 마라 마음바칼에 겹겹겹세 랑도르기네 상마신게 와 껴 상마땡게 상계 요구반 토바차오라 돈다 상부 타르침바 셰 타르침베 가사진 그르소나 아니 셰레 앞에바 랍침부 툭툭으레 네텐데시 제고요삼 디에체도 아니 촌이야게 삼제 와 아니 꿀로 전에 장주세모 심제 탐제던 담봉에 솔마지와 지기 라다미 고바 토바치기 라다미 고바 디텔이야 아니 대사마이바 타르바투기 작단 방제 타르바투기 타르바라치부 동엘에 타와 마이바 심제신 탐제게 동엘에 타와 제통게시기 디에체도네 산제지 고바 토바차 디에체도 추행게 예섬 군노세탐의 삼바쇼소데 된데서 아야
So here, by thinking in this way, reflecting upon the way in which we take birth, now some might have this kind of fear that arises from identifying maybe the self as being like the body. And so they feel like when they cast off their body or at death, they are going to become sort of non-existent. There's that kind of fear that can arise at the annihilation of the self. But if we don't have, if we have that kind of sense that there are past and future lives, that we are going to not be sort of ended at the time of death, but rather that we have to continue on, then our concern becomes about where we will be taking rebirth. And so here, this is really where that sort of transformation takes place. You don't have a fear at the kind of ending of the self, but rather, where will I take rebirth and what will come in the future? And so here, this is in this way, there are those who, though, even if one doesn't accept past and future lives, by sort of acting in a way wherein they are getting rid of those kinds of negative actions, those non-virtuous actions, they can benefit themselves in just this very life. If we act in a way in which we are trying to get what we need through cheating others, lying to them, stealing from them, deceiving them, and so forth, we're not going to be be happy even in this life. But someone who maybe they don't have full confidence in future lives, maybe they don't necessarily believe they're totally non-existent, but they're just not sure, like, well, is there a future life? They will be benefited in this very life by getting rid of those kinds of negative actions, as well as in their sort of future life. So here, our actions can become dharma if we act well based upon that kind of sense of wanting to get good results in the future. But even if we're not sort of sure about that, again, not being able to perceive something is not perceiving its non-existence. So for those who are not, we can't directly see our future lives. And so for some, that becomes a sort of point of contention. Are there going to be future lives? But even if they aren't sure, acting in a way that is in accordance with Dharma will bring good results in the temporary as well as in the longer term. And so here, we should think in this way that we're going to practice the Dharma, recognizing again that we are impermanent and wanting to avoid those kinds of negative results, but not just wanting to be freed from the lower realms. We also come to recognize that we want to get out of this cycle of taking up and casting off these aggregates, being driven by our karma and afflictions in this kind of uncontrolled cycle of rebirth. We'd rather get free of that kind of cycle of suffering. And this really involves attaining a kind of exhaustion of craving, getting rid of our attachment and hatred, and getting rid of, in the sort of 12 links of dependent origination, there's particularly that link, the 8th link of craving, and then the 9th of taking. So when we sort of are lacking the causes for continued rebirth, we're able to have an extinction of all of our suffering. So by abandoning the kind of sense of self and other that is based upon this strong holding to a self, holding to an I, and the kind of attachment and hatred that comes from that, by realizing the opposite of that, by realizing selflessness, by coming to understand emptiness, we can achieve a freedom from this kind of uncontrolled rebirth. So getting rid of that grasping at a self allows us to attain a kind of liberation. But we also reflect that that's not itself sufficient, because we look around at all other sentient beings who have acted as our mothers and fathers and see that from my own side, I want to be able to help these other sentient beings be able to achieve the same kind of liberation, to get rid of their attachment and anger that comes from this grasping at a self. And so therefore, I'm going to strive to attain this state of Buddhahood, a state in which one has freed oneself from all faults and attained all good qualities and has complete knowledge of all of the points to be adopted and abandoned. And in order to do that, I need to listen to the Dharma. And so thinking in this way, generating a kind of bodhicitta motivation, building up through these stages of thinking about rebirth in the lower realms, as well as one's own liberation, and extending then to the liberation of all sentient beings, being able to attain a state in which you have the ability to fully benefit other sentient beings. We should think in this way and set a proper motivation for listening to the Dharma.
Oh yeah, duce tendrese dimba, duce tendrese dinama. Duce pachane share yorda. Oh, salu jangbata bose, drag in jangbata bose, dressing in jangbata bose ora. Sunday shana, so telepeshan sharing and dendres yara, the dust. Dungi jangba days, Tasso Shingaris Taliba, want to tan jamba, was a shake de ora. Dungi jangba de, Kuji Meber, Ke Mares, Kuji Meber Kenane. The Gavanda Savanali and Deshin Yabuke Vanashi, and Satramos, the bird of Tezol and Deshin Kigurati, Kigiomara. You may have Kigine, you do Tamja de Gene, Lumba Chili Kene, Lumba Kangali Kevure, Deshin the Kagali Kivanashi, Saton Bukari, Yosal and Deshin Kivurti Kigumara. You do Tamjeto. Do you chili Kena, Sawa you do Kena, Gunga Kevura. O Tiendico, Dungashi King Gashila Magi, Yungashi Lumba Kashelike, Lumba Kashelike Meduna, Korenga Kiwasegora, you Kasha Kashelike, Kasha Kashel Make, did you Kasha Kashelike, Kasha Kashel Makena? Go Jessa de Karchin Kiware, Magisa de Karchin Magi Resenata, Kujinshi and Mado Shea Marwa. ranga kewa sonza 아니 규진 요래서 거라 규진 매네 유질께는 탐질께 그래 유질께는 탐질께 그래 가셜께 가셜 매게 어디 교생 가르스 트니다 고셔요 말 어딜 규산산 깨버래 딜 규마산산 마기버래 스티셔 거라 어디 따티도 자갈이야 규밀에 깨와서 알아 근데 딱배 줄에 깨와서 좀더 망보여라 어디 선전 때 말에서 상계 소에 된다리야 설루잠ben도 토즈나테서 송겨어도 디내신데 쉐기와라 두 탐제도 깨와면서 두질께는 두 탐제도 야나 유두 탐제도 남의 깨와 매반죠 야나네 규매바 깨기네 야나 유다 두 유수도 롱바로와 두수 두라 대다 마이 버랭가 깨와 임베세 참아 랭가 깨와라 두 카셜께 카셜 매케레 롱바 카셜께 카셜 매케로와 티에나 코 랭가 깨 랭가 마게로 까브리께 까브리 매케와레 되와라 티엠베 장바딜레 교여바 타초사레스레 교매바 켈레바토준 디그마레세 고부 컨디션에 교여레 송거라 아니 나게 교gen지 도sun 장방원바 원바 메세워르 여반 되나야 다 장젠바도저와 되도 자갈티 뚝다디 타르시 단다 요토 케바망부요레 타르쳔부레 티에서 남바체베나 귀 도sun 제부 여네 끼그마레세워라 나 건조 데 그냥 아주 용가리 와라 놈지야 용가 텔시그라 텔데날 놈 요레세 되거래 놈 매네 제마 텔시네네 놈 컨디션 그래서 그래 귀도서 매번 접으시 깨요 말에세 이 연안이 제마 쓰르네 놈 끼기도 해서 걔는 제마 쓰르네 놈 깨요 말아 텔디 누구도 쓰네 놈 깨요라 귀도서 매번시 요 말을 삼아 귀도서 요레세 무슨도 수세통마도 그 개발시를 마도 귀도서 매번 저요 말에 참아 귀도서 연계시래 어떤데 삼겨도 내 말을 송겨라 근데 그저 오면 내가서 쇼아 요새되라 말아 요새되라 다이네 쇼레다 말에 규치대 요르바 된 유니 쇼군에 레고로 마도 단다 쇼군에 레요 말아 마릉군에 레요 말아 아이네 코란디 레야진 두 섬된디 텔레 귀도서 요새샤라 딘데 말았어 귀도서 이벤 레비오 말았어 아기에서도 하대 귀 당니도 레비 당니 연에 껴와서 달에 껴와서 되시거라 랑게 규지 원바 메세베스기 단단 원바 세아스도 단단 원숨도 통고 말해 디나 놈 요아레 오메날이야 쇼 요아레 오메날 추라 요아레 다라 요아레 단단 무슨도 세기요 말마다 요래서 뭐버 메세와서 무슨을 세우지 통고요 말에 아 지에서네 세서네 무슨 세우지 통고도 하시 예 되네 요래서 거라 기도서 뭐버 메세와를 예반 되나야 얘네 뒤들인 장바라니 얘네 뒤에서 다 장바 셔담니 뒤드네 예배에는 장바 고 깨사르와 깨사르니 양자 교기에 고에면도 와서래 라는 깨와 때문에 예배를 세시노 달에 깨와 요 말이 달에 깨네 뒤에서 예요자 양자 교기도 깨교자고로 라는 깨고요라 텐데 깨요 말이 장바라니 깨데 예고베 뭐뭐 깨데 예고베르 깨데 예고베 대단나 랑이 교진지 라량 깨버시 메고세 교도서 연하니 교진 라량 깨버시 고 말이셔라 설류 장바데 랑이 교진 교인체네 다야 설류 장바데 랑이 년랭기 교다 겐hen지 치게 또바 교인체네 교인체베 셀이야 로버드야 치게 너 tinde요 말해서라 주딘 줄긴 주고 서르지 답이나 사변딘 줄긴 줄기체니 얘네데 긴년데디 뭐 줄고라 집에서기 견나네 가서래 교인체네로와 교인 얘랭기 주디기 교인 튜니 깨고라 딘 줄긴 줄기체니 제부디 깨고라 얘랭기 주디 교인체 매ve체서야 포루시 시마 깨는데 tinde요 말해서라 교인체네 교인레 셴도 라완도 두베 수기 깨나네 교단 제메지 깨고 아니 교단 저만게 깨고 그래서 주탐절에 살류 장밖에 어여바타로 제메시 끼기나 아니 교인제 삼물 살류 장밖에 있어 멜레 살류 장밖에 있어 봐 사kam불에 살류 장밖에 있어 어떤 데 시작을 했은 거다 야 시겨 야 this teaching
So here, picking up in the text from where we had left off last time, in the English translation, it's on page 18, beginning with the dependent arising of composite phenomena. So here, the Rice Seedling Sutra explains the dependent arising of a composite phenomenon by using a rice seedling as an illustration. And so if a rice seedling were produced without any causes or conditions, it would have to be produced constantly in all places, or it would never be produced anywhere at any time. So here, again, putting forth the example of a rice seedling, if it is the case that a rice seedling arises without any causes or conditions, then it would have to be it would sort of be produced in all places at all times. So it wouldn't be necessary to have the cause of the proper soil. You would be able to get a rice seedling from planting a seed on a snow mountain, or it would not be necessary to plant such that you give rise to the fruits in summer. It would be viable to do so in winter as well, because if something is causeless, then it would need to arise in all places at all times. If something arises only occasionally, given that there's like a certain place or a certain time, that means that it is dependent upon causes and conditions. If something doesn't, the opposite of that being that if something were to arise causelessly, then it would be produced at all times in all places, or never anywhere at all. Instead, it is sometimes produced and sometimes not produced, so we can establish that it has causes and conditions. Then continuing, some might assert, as did some Indian philosophers, particularly like the Samkhya school, that the seedling already exists at the time of its causes and conditions, and that it is simply not yet manifest. So here, again, refuting the kind of philosophical schools that would assert a causeless production, or the production from the sort of intent or thought of a creator, and so forth. Here, it's decisive that because things arise occasionally, only in some places and at some times, then they must have causes and conditions. That establishes their causality. So going to those sorts of schools that do assert some kind of causality, the Samkhyas would say that things are sort of self-arisen, that actually the result, the seedling, exists at the time of the cause, the seed, and that so the seedling already exists at the time of its causes and conditions, and that it is simply not yet manifest. So here, this is, the Samkhya's use the classic sort of example of like a mustard seed. They say that, that the oil that you can get out of that must already exist at the time of the cause. Otherwise, how could it come about when you say squeeze that in order to get the oil out of that mustard seed? And so this sort of leads to absurd conclusions to say that the effect is already existent at the time of the cause, just in an unmanifest sort of form. Buddhists would maybe come back with, well, then is it the case that, and Samkhyas would accept, that say yogurt and butter exist in that milk. If you have milk that has the ability to give rise to those things, those sorts of results already have to be there. They already have to exist at this time of the cause. So this is the kind of position of self-production. And so here, the problem that arises, as Buddhapalita has put forth, that if something is self-produced, or if the effect already exists at the time of the cause, then its production again would be senseless. So here, but if the seedling had already been produced and existed at that time, at the time of the cause, then it would be unnecessary for it to be produced yet again by its causes and conditions. So here, it's not the case that it's viable to say that the result already exists at the time of the cause, because then why does it need to be produced? Its production becomes senseless, becomes meaningless. On the other hand, if we postulate that the seedling's causal continuum is somehow broken and that it is produced from something other than its causal continuum, the effect, the seedling, would have to be independent of causes. So if you say then instead that, like, if you have the seed and the continuum of that seed or that substantial cause is somehow cut and then that leads to the result, that too is not a viable kind of an option, because then there would be no connection between the cause and the result. So you could have, because those continuums would be cut, anything could produce anything. Fire could produce a rice seedling. A dry ground could produce a rice seedling. So here, this again, as it would be produced without any relationship to its causes and conditions, anything would be able to produce it.
뭐야? 참미지 직부당스도 다들 뭐 들어서 차선이 지금에 고라 직장자 로봇 수치 먹은 게 와, 뒤ndav진에 뒤신다 로봇이 뭐 고라 직장장이 봐. 근데서 거라 다 참매서라 지참매서 참매 만복해는 거라. 내가 좁다티도 산제 슈베컵리아 예베 좁다신다들 참매 만복해는 그래. 나 남바전에 참매지요 말도. 참매지 지부세. 균미지 딱바세. 균미에 딱바 만복해래 그래. 다 딱바세로 지소 당비규 지소데 딱바인에서 텔레규요 말에서 텔레케는 거라. 균미지 딱바도 자유지 라와체서 자유지 라와체 랑게투베 자유세로 텐데켈 시요도 오마텐요 로션이 최탐제 따유예서라 자유요 말에 따유예 현다질 때는 민바다네 대인바 이마에게 타니 샤고레스고라 자유지 라와체지 달아서 발라세 다 딱베 주가이나 뒤딱바이나 가리나 지소 딱바이 당베 주지소니 대달 텔레규메스고라 저전 낭바전에 되게 말해 디케베시 디케스도 주코란데 주진기 깨바 손자네 주되게 레비션다 깨토 그래서라 주코란 주진 션다 왕이 깨바 마이네 딱바이나네 그 레부 자와치에게 요 말에는 레분 담면데 깨토베 요 말에스 계시거든 레부 깨베 자와 미로베세 주딱발라 미로베 설류 장바데 주대달에 껴라 미로야스 딱베 주칸레자 껴런 그 말에 가르쳐니 끼그레스네 가르를 끼그레스네 깨지긴 주로단 덴베 뒤째 상만데 깨지를 준로야래 말아서 마주르제 소소 따라진다 상에서데 네마 예베 단다 예베데 마음바텐게 손도 소르고도 와 근데 말하고 뒤에는 중중관계로 지니 숨함에 kokbana 용게 대소 가주 단다 예고르티 요 말아 부춘주때 로얄레드자 뭐마신 부차기도 와 이님에도 단데 되는 것이 고라 pen yorgun yugu제 누구야라 로더 유르구야라 로추나 유구나 롱가나 유거 롱가나 니데 시간 유구레 나 유 니마르레는 유구네 깨지레는 유네코 주단 깽게 된게 자로와 된데 콘 유라 제고야라 깨지게 유라단 덴베 차도마 제게세 차망부 용게 유화신게 뚜둑 띵중기 교육거 볼래서 지실을 떠댄게 로와 땡진데버 좋아인게 주코라 호텔에 때는 데부 그 줄도전에 데부 담마다 기그래서라 개와로에 설륜 장바 손 데뷔응어 남네 로요와 참지직된 용소 제베 다보 매베 깰레 개와다 다디 규진 상소는 거기에 온 거는 맞잖아 아니 현다지기 지금 제가 보원줄에서 와케 고삼나 지금 말해서 마게 고삼나 규진 사선에 깨운 거래서 요함에 백견했더니 좀 스타일 가지고 뭐무시해서 왔지래 다보 매백견에 딱 보시네 말릭스도 지금 제가 보던 말릭스 가가이나 말릭스 마르지해서 야가데 초진에 하고르죠 도그래지 조사 다 말릭 마르지에서 스웨트바치에 팽기도 와 kunjo koran debares cheserch sabeda chuda troshire so ale tamadma 연주를 사변다 추다 조셔서 규진 뒤에 속과 등에 랑게 되고 깨 현배 네바 제 계징하시는 권에 규진해야 돼. 오라 규진 망보지 년례다 현재 시간 깨 망보지 소 대선 유로를 보시체 대 권에 권도 되부터 깨워 쇼서야 네바 앞에는 되부터 깨워를 해야 돼. 준 유로치 맞아서 딱 봐서 대셔는 되부터 깨요 말도 권에 권도 유로하다 저와래 debuke versheba himbe keshi lan juro meche bada keshi lan juro meche bada juro kewe tanto droas koro juro ne sa chulu tanto tapshana kon juara dugu debu ya pen dog be chosen do nani gyuchi gyo no juro meche bada juro chwa tingi debu teta de kewe tanto mendro namne debu teta de gyuru gyuwa meche do sta tanda gyuta wasig mare gyude debu de gyuada timbe gyurdo shene ni de gyure gore debu ke gore sheto ya tibata chi.
So here it continues in the text saying that nothing that is indivisibly unitary, unchangeably permanent, and substantially independent can give rise to an effect. So here there are those kinds of Indian philosophical schools that assert things that are partless, whether that is a self that is partless or like particles or time, moments of time. There are those Indian philosophical schools that assert things that are partless, unitary. For Buddhists, there's nothing that is partless. Anything that is a thing, that is a knowable object, has to have parts. So here it continues by saying that thus causes with such characteristics as being indivisibly unitary, unchangeably permanent, and substantially independent can give rise to an effect. So causes with such characteristics cannot produce a rice seedling. So something, again, and there are Indian philosophical schools that assert things that are permanent, that are unchanging, that have this kind of existence that is self-sufficient and substantially existent, as opposed to the kind of existence of being merely imputedly existent, not having any kind of substantial existence, as is posited by the Madhyamakas and the Prasangika school in particular. But for the Samkhya's, something like this sort of principle, this sort of underlying reality is something that is itself permanent. It acts as the cause for all of these impermanent things, but Buddhists would assert that no, it's not possible for something that is itself permanent to act as the cause of a particular result, a particularly impermanent result. So instead, the seedling must be produced from a cause that is a composite thing, that is composed of parts, is dependently arisen, has multiple parts, and changes every moment. So again, as we've discussed much in the past, therefore, as we will investigate in more detail in the next chapter, there can be no master of the world, no divine creator who creates the world merely by thinking it. The world is definitely created from causes and conditions. So already, and again, there are in India and other places where they sort of think of like, oh, well, what's going to happen to me after death is dependent upon what this God desires. Like they're sort of going to decide where I go. Again, that's not something that can be asserted to be a cause in this sort of understanding of Buddhists. It is instead, again, an assemblage of causes and conditions, such as the seed, water, fertilizer, warmth, and moisture that produces the seedling. This assemblage carries a capacity that corresponds with the production of its effect and is connected to the effect, the seedling, through a gradual transformation moment by moment. So it is impossible for this seedling to arise from a cause that does not itself undergo momentary change, or without this process of change contributing to the production of the effect. So again, it is the case that we have this kind of sense that we are not momentary, that we remain, like what the person who was here yesterday was here the day before, and so forth. But if we look at this, if we examine, like, do we have the same sort of minds that we had when we were in our mother's womb, or even when we were very small children? We can't even hardly recognize those. We see, like, sort of over the period of, say, 10 years, we can notice, oh, a change happened in those 10 years. Well, if a change happened in 10 years, then a change must have happened in 5 years. A change must have happened in 2 years. A change, and we go smaller and smaller until we realize that everything has to be momentary. Nothing can be static and remaining for any moment in order for it to be efficacious, in order for it to be able to bring about results. So the causes of something that is impermanent and momentary themselves need to be constantly undergoing this sort of process of change. So here again, it is only when the sort of substantial cause and all the coordinating conditions come together that there is the ability to bring forth an effect. We can see that effects arise from their various causes that are in this way, again, not partless, having parts are impermanent and are not substantially existent.
Oh yeah. 显然就你就说 显然就你让个这边当你准备特别切都严了是，就是的个这部的让是的就这部的特别切都就是有的些了，就让个就来就等于就是就年龄的就说了，年龄三分的是的三分的让个就让人就了些呢，第军的来是个的，这个三分的是嘛，大部分三分的就了些第军里头呢，你有我不给我了嘛都。 现在技术要嘛都年龄的做起来了，让人觉得决定的都，让你年龄让人觉得决什么决定的了，你这部的年代的中国人是我了，这部中国人现在决这部给我出卖了噻，这里现在这部决这部给我出要嘛，年龄的决定我把决出呢，年年纪轻的这里绕不起个的，年龄是呢。 这部的我军中给的就的了年龄是的，你话两把这部的人间人中给的是吧？天气今年是年龄的了，你们都绕不清个，我这边呢啥边是什么的，你去那绿那折那那说吧，就是些是啥轮把了说吧，这是天气今年都要的。 这年龄的军定义了，天气之间做找钱的年龄的军定义了，你年代的用过这是个了。那这不中了，可是让人觉得军定义都是，让人觉得军定义都这不中了，现在军这不这边出现没了，军下刚呀，满就按这边我是把没的。 규 차든 유로친의 데뷔고 레고를 마도 규코라 사빈 도도 코라 감부 코라 대니 데뷔고 양도야지 요 말도 자 규차 가야 마주라 데뷔고로 semba droa me hesere meba 규 데뷔고로 포함해라스 규 데뷔고로 포함해봐서 설린 점에 되어서 포함해봐서도 할게는 좋았어 다들 오늘 맛이 용구래 아주 단단 아주 포스디 겨와 포스디 단단 미데 겨와 심어 던두래도라 단단 미데 가서라 하래도라 야 포스디 미데 마유르제 야도에 삼로 고기와라 디요 말에 디인디페나 미코나 데요 티판가 도데니 티 슈식 파조데 데브디 끼기와라 딜페 망부찬다 마시 올레 용구라 페 망부찬 소라 이네 다와샤 되어라 아니 그 다외 송년 몸라 망부 추단 시에군데 같은데 그 요새 당부 연계 상말 그 송년 차그라 다와디 되나 슈 제든데 시에게 요 말도 그러나 이게 요네 뒤 깨체는 데부터 버져 타는 것도 어디나 시에서랑 아주 겨 앞에서 겨한디 망가게 그런 거 직내진 더슈르 저르르야 깨운 거라 이빼들랑 아주 미치기 쭈르무시 사귀나 쭈르무시 비제사나 아 쭈르무시 도스나 퍼져 메디 마상게 칼로 추코야 요세라 그날 오늘 쭈무게래요 말아 다이나 코피게 퍼져 쭈무사 통데 코라 칼라 가주 다요 했는데 요르도 피네 패제치 된 루요 말아 다네시 칸에 칼럽체 라말라 교수 산게르 교수 깜르르 질라베나 셰르 질라베나 셰데나 신당당 버르지 코드 집지 간지 땅 두그라 이거 셰데 콜 펀로게 말이셔라 코란디 라울라람데 tin 라우지 수케인 거라 대손자 코탄다 제부디 만주르제 띵올 파드요 말은 제부디 존르데 디슈긴 퍼조데 제부디 깨운 거래스 대손 거라 포아포아셔데 아주 기지 포아서도 기지 포아서데 단단한 소스 미디 민원에란 때네 단주되게서 민원에란 때네 교시만 두고베 나와르 샤고로 어떤데 요 말에서 거라 배드 미팅 줄네 티슈기 치마치마치 깨운 거라 포함해 봐서 대단하야 중간에 균체베 제수 데부 좋아하면 야 예len기 교든가 살 이 제수야 데부 로브르도 깨했는데 요 말에서 그런 균트는 요 거라 가바나 뒤냠도 딱 교든 예len기 교든 가바나 아니 대다 뒤냠도 아니 데부도 깨고 그래서 상대 도면하셔서 상셔야 요르도 길에 초치를 잘라 망루스는 지대 야자용으로 지대 마음으로 이내시 초치대 마와다 초치대 토아대 뒤념을 해서 상대 도망이대 길로 자야지 다 자가 있는 길로서도 도와가서는 것이 상스라 상제 상대 도면하시 규定각마다 냠도는 레부디 깨와래서 뒤념을 해서 상대 도매주도 레부 깨와 힘배 규단 레부 제발 좋아하기 넣어서 예랭이 규대다 델라 렌지시니 tro셔발 때네 네 규대다 델네 델네 레마도 티바로 규럽지 체리 하게요 말했습니다 어디 봐도 지다 야
So here, then, a cause has the quality of producing the entity of its effect. That's really what we define a cause as. It has that ability to produce that entity of its effect. In other words, it has the property of reaching for its effect. So the only way for a cause to produce its effect is through a gradual process of transformation of the cause. Here, when we talk about like planting a seed and getting a rice seedling, it's based upon the sort of continuity that when we plant that seed and have that substantial cause and then all of the kind of proper coordinating conditions, we can bring about a sprout. The seed sort of holds that potential or the property of reaching for its effect. But when it is combined with the proper sort of coordinating conditions, it can transform into the particular effect. Again, this sort of rice seedling. So here, again, given that an effect cannot occur without some aspect of the cause undergoing transformation, there can be no cause that becomes the effect, its effect directly. So here, it is this sort of transformation that leads to a particular result. It's not like the cause itself becomes the result, nor, as we'll see below, is it due to the sort of cutting of the continuum of the cause that then allows the result to come about. But when we think about it, like, for example, when we talk about taking a future life, and we think about, like, oh, I want to become a god in the future, we sort of almost think that it's like this body or this person that we have now that will become a god, or like the thing that we have right now. But that's not actually the case. The sort of transformation of going from one rebirth to the next is not quite like the sort of way that we imagine it. There are lots of sort of examples of this when we can talk about, and this word sort of transformation is the same word that we use, like poa, like when we're moving from one life to another. So we could give examples of, like, the moon. Just by the moon existing there, it's able to cast a form in whatever sort of reflective surface there might be. It's not as though the moon somehow moves there or somehow gives something to each of those, but rather by its mere existence, it is able to produce those kinds of reflections in everything. Or One could use the example of like if you see someone who is eating something really sour, even though you don't put that kind of sour thing in your own mouth, just by seeing that other person, you can start to salivate because you see the sort of look on their face of they're having eaten this really sour thing. So again, what is it that really came about and created that salivating in your mouth? We can't talk about that the sort of thing. It's the cause itself becoming the effect, but rather there's this kind of transformation that's really important here. Or for example, one good thing about it too, like if you have something that you are reciting, and by you reciting it many, many times, someone else is then able to pick up on that, and they can now recite that by heart. What sort of transformation took part there? You didn't give them your words or give them your knowledge or so forth. So anyway, these are some of the ways that we should think about the cause undergoing transformation, because there's no cause that becomes its effect directly. There's a transformation involved. Nevertheless, it is not the case that an effect occurs only after the cause has completely ceased to exist, such that the continuum of the cause has been cut. So it's also not the case that there's this sort of unrelated, the continuum of the cause is cut, and then we have the coming about of the result. But rather, it is like the two sides of a scale, when the one side goes down, the other side simultaneously goes up. When the cause ceases to exist, the effect occurs simultaneously. So therefore, the effect arises in a way that is linked to the cause. So like we see with a sort of scale, if you're measuring kilos or pounds or whatever it may be, and one side goes up, the other side goes down, this is the same kind of process of transformation, of simultaneity between the ceasing of the cause and the effect coming into being.
Oh yeah. Tena jangba rangi kyujingi tusu rangi ngo nye de kyudu ne hongba ya mayese. Tan jangba de roa rangi kyujingi tusu ko yue ne tene so chanyo wa mare so gordo. Tajin denge to so tin denge do wa. Twachil yue ne koran yue ne ngabzo tin ram tongu do. Sabyo rejini ma shingani yachi ya ten de koran tin ya ten yong samsan tenge do. Koran de ne ten rawachen ten ya ke yo mare kyujin so so no ko lubur tu ya ten chogo wa no. Kana jangba rangi kyujin gi tu so rangi ngo ni de kyudu ne wa ya ma yi kyudu ne su dina yue ne su ten yong ke mare se. Chi shenda jine yong ya ke yo mare so wala. Mahimba rangi keji gi gyurwe kabki kyun la se nyelen gi kyuche tele lenji chegen gi troche ne ti kyun dilia ne lubur to ko wangme to su ke yong re so wala. Kyujin so so ko lubur to ti che yong go no. Kwarsura chema lubur dun chungwa ta chema kyujin gi chen ko lubur du ya tan yong go re chere. Gagba naya kashi don drama ga do sa shenda jil pa thon dra yo ma res go no. Kama dan dra tenjin de bar jungwa yin se ngara zu tonal ya chi ke on de twa jin su tan yo ne do shenda jil do es ro ji chora yung go re tin na shi ma res ko ma zu na na shi metemba kama ta bu re so go no. Rang ju dan ken ji wang ge wang me do ke ba do wang me do ga ba yin be junde ji chö kan ya rawa du tu me dos wame so chema lubur wa si do ena ngaran so tarche de jina sagba gyasuna yogu do tongba yeba che ko cha de jini yogu mar do ya trabu yin ba che ani pe tongba yeba che sagba yona ena ko yogu do tarja koran ge yeba so de tongwe wa nga jo tonda ko yo marwa ko gyujin san de sa ma lubur do ko yo so ya gyujin me na ko zu de do ya ke yong do o tinashi sishin la zela so ba gyujin san san ko lubur do rama ba ke yong ra gyujin ma san ke ke yo mara o ti son za ko di gyujin ge wange wame do ke ba do wame do ga ba yin ba so del si ko ra so so rama ra che su te ke yo mara gyujin san san de bu de lubur do ya te yong go re si go do wame do ga ba yin be gyunde ge che kan la ya rawa do tu ba me si de rawa che ne su chi ne te yuan da pa shin da so do ten de ke yo ma de se go do ne tang jen be chi ne ko che te on de 시소용 안에 그게 연의 소통이 거라 규도서요. 아니 파도도 양파 시소를 파템도 시소나 파슈도 같은데 시여no 어떤데 그 말에 무슨 거야. 디바도 지가
So here, then it continues saying, in this manner, a seedling does not exist at the time of its causes and conditions. That is to say, it does not exist simultaneously with its cause. So when we think about a sprout or a seedling coming into being, it's not something that already existed at the time of the cause, like the sort of self-production or the kind of idea of the Samkhya that result exists at the time of the cause. And it doesn't arise sort of from itself. It doesn't come from its own kind of being in the way, again, that the Samkhyas assert some kind of self-production. And when we see, say, sprouts arising in a field, it seems like, oh yeah, those seeds are giving rise to those sprouts. There's a sense of their coming from a particular kind of self-arisen cause. But it's not actually the case that they come about in that way. Rather, it is only due to the kind of aggregation of the proper causes and conditions, having that sort of the continuum of that substantial cause affected by various conditions that sort of adventitiously, that those, when they come together, something is produced. And so it continues saying that, moreover, it does not come from somewhere else later on. It's not the case that the effect comes from somewhere other than its particular cause. But rather, a seedling is a dependent arising that appears and disappears like a magician's illusion. It arises suddenly, composed from causes at a certain point in the continuum of momentary transformations of its causes. And when it ceases to exist, it does not go somewhere else. So we have this kind of like idea that things seem to be sort of stable and static, but really when we examine causes and conditions, there's no stability, nothing is static, but they're constantly undergoing this kind of momentary transformation. And so when we point to a sort of certain point in the continuum, it's undergoing these kinds of transformations on a momentary basis. So we can point to something and call it a cause and then an effect later on. But here, like when we, for example, see a flag or a prayer flag flapping in the wind, it seems like that flag is sort of flapping on its own. But again, it's only due to the sort of causes and conditions, having the proper wind and so forth. In the absence of that, it's not going to come into being. So here, again, it's impossible for any effect or cause to be established independently. These are mutually dependent. And all transformations within a continuum do not arise and cease on their own, but they do so by the power of their specific causes and conditions. So here, in the collection of causes and conditions, there is a constant change or flux. They are never static. So this is, again, there is no sort of thing, an effect that can exist at the time of the cause, but rather it is something that comes about through this momentary, moment-to-moment kind of transformation due to the aggregate, the coming together of particular causes and conditions.
Oh yeah, tena medebar rovesedo. Tena medebar jusen tena sora. Medebar sudo keji tambote nibana keji tambote keji nibe desu medebar sora. Ran trubdu ki keji niba medebar soda. Keji chike ne kon yuarsha chi chegoro. Tambote nibe desu tambuna shinche degyo mar yundu ora. Tena medebar rovese. Keji tambote keji nibe desu majik bar medebar rovese. Yundu resora. Yure kyujin sosowa tuman debales. Kyujin sosowa mambushin debale tene. Gyurwa am jigbadan dembara. Gyurwa ronge am keji ki jigba jing ronge ge. Gyula tene tende drebu kewa talya. Deche ki tende sigire ser siridoa. Gyurwa am jigbadan dembara drebun deli chakwa. Gyute dan del ne kengi ene robo cheche. Ko drebu di kewa doa. Del chakwa kewan duje ke wando chebe. Tenjin dreban jungwa shekya charong os. O tichi lapsana.
So then again, it is impossible. Um, this in the collection of causes and conditions, there is a constant change or flux. So they are never sort of static. When we think about like the first moment of a rice sprout doesn't remain for more than a moment. It becomes the kind of second moment of that. And so here. Again, it says that the effect arises in a way that is linked or connected to the constantly changing continuum of causes. This is then aptly called dependent and linked arising of composite phenomena. So here, it is from this kind of like constantly changing continuum of causes that we can speak about the way that they come about. They're in constant flux. All of these are momentary.
Oh yeah. The Darsalu Jamba de se, Tadarwa, Salu Jamba de, Rawachan Yerani Kechi Cheba Tabu Ancient, Ko Rawachan and Cheba Pochege, Kechuya, Majechuya, Tende Wangchane, Samlutani Kia to your Maris or Tana Salu Jamba de, Rawachan Yerani Cheba Bom Tabu Ancient dos, Songangi Tabu de, Ancient Kujit and che gyurwale Quran yelen kudan lenji chige tende to so ne ni tin gyo chen ya ke wo ma do shenda samlistan ke ku me tende chen ya yo ma re song gara tende gen gyurwale o me do ke wa yin las ko lu bur to ke wa res kudan ken so de Quran rawa chen chen ya ke yo ma ko ma ki ran ji ke yo go do ke ben jang ban de ke chi ngama tambo de ke chi ni ber 매배 매들라서 깨지 담보데 깨지 니바 대고 말와 깨지 치매 장반 남자 나만에 여봐 깨지 치마 치마데 담보네 여봐 말와 담보데 니바 지로 여라 랑게 랭데 깨지 나마다 ring데베 깨지 나마다 아니 녀랭게 큐라 ring데 나마다 렌지 시게 트다 셰르 살름 바토들 셰르스그라 트다 셰르세 롱소게 네 롱데 코쿠여노 야 통야리아 게야리아 롱소게 규진레 루부르 서준도 깨고바 현진 장베르 데차 가야 깨신 바라와게 네바 메도스 어디버드 시교네 시버시다 되게
So then similarly, in the same manner, a rice seedling is not produced in isolation, but from the transformation that is the dependent arising of its causes and conditions. Again, no independent divine creator or master of the universe is involved. It's not the case that if all of the causes and conditions are assembled, something needs the sort of divine inspiration or the thought of some kind of divine creator for it to come about. It's a dependent arising that comes from its causes and conditions, and there's no other sort of a divine creator involved. So here too, it says a rice seedling is momentary in the sense that the rice seedling of the first moment has ceased to exist in the second moment of the rice seedling. So the second moment of the rice seedling did not exist previously. It was not, here, again, it was produced newly and adventitiously from its causes and conditions. That is, from both the preceding moment that is a part of the continuum of rice seedling moments that are similar type, and conditions such as warmth, moisture, and air. So again, the sort of preceding moment that is a part of a continuum of a rice seedling, that's the sort of substantial cause, as well as those coordinating conditions such as warmth and moisture and air, all of those things being necessary to actually produce that particular effect. So it's not the case that a portion of the rice seedling's continuum that has already been produced lingers on, but rather it is newly produced in every moment of that kind of continuum.
Oh yeah. Oh, tanda de karsore. Keji gyurachebe gyuleten and debutigris shaggy or no. O tandal tende rede or tisoza karsore. Tidi number maybe to the mambu or no shagalia. Oh, it isn't decision. Number and keji les move on the kanga jidu resete and the digma resugora. 깨지 깨지긴 제도 연안에 드부께 두고 말해서 그 깨네 깨지지 대안에 매우 살아. 드부 간데서 깨고래서 드부께 그 뒤주면 와. 내 좀들을 써보다 경아치를 써보다 자와 제발이야 뒤주고래. 근데 깨지를 교라지요 말해서 깨지긴 교라지에는 자와 드부께 자와 제토고 말해서 요라. 딜이야 깨지긴 교라지나 그 균이 튀제. 지금 교르비세제네 누가 처리세제 레부키가 어려서 오라. 어떤 사람이 빼셔야 돼 가지고 로드브지는 로디 깨지긴 지기 오라. 깨지긴 만지는 로드 손주고 말와. 로펜데 당셔는데 왜도 용구도 왜도데 대대도 왜도 깨지긴 요르고 오라. 깨지긴 만주는 아니 왜도 손주고 말이 근데 로 그기기 오라 깨지긴 균투이제 대들 내가 지기도 와. 미통에 빼서 로야도 세와시 멤버파세 뭐가 세와시 베셔와시기 오라. 제가 깨지긴 요러셔베이나 그 교회를 튀지 얘네 레브게가 자와시 투그래서 어디셔요 너 지당 뭐가 단달라 깨지긴 요하신게 되어래. 요하시고 말에 딱 배워 되는 마도 네 가서라. 레브게 투고 말해서 어떤데 말해서 오다. 그래서 쉽게 받는 용도 술랑 선바시저에 섬기께시 레셔메스 기회 등에 매력 받는 당이 셰바고 생각하죠 하고요 말해서 아주 선부제 돼야 돼 미션 되어라 나도 선부제 돼야 돼 깨지긴 좋아져야 선부제 되어야 말도 나랑 그 선부제 되어서 라와션이 되게 말아 술랑 선바시저 섬기께시 레셔메 소소 샘데 깨지긴 요르도 단데 대리 야제도 ben 요르제 로도 어때나시 샘 깨지긴 요르나시 소소 샘버티야 깨지긴 요니야 샘버 깨고래시 거라 술라 샘버시자가 샘버치 대야데시 거다 술라 샘버시 샘지 깨지래시메시 깨 등에 매력 받는 다니 셰바코스 가라서 뒤하고 요 말해서 소소소소 하고 요 말아 소소 간데지 번내다 오네데 나 삼자 커신이 영에만이 단다 여대 버리시 영에메도 단다 여대 영에마 여 단데도 마음 받den게를 삼고도 교회대 연구하러 마도지 깨지까지 야지 속으라 우당구도 우랭구도 추통구도 칼라사구도 롱디 아버지 맨날 소토토고 말도 롱날 두자주나 네 짠다버지 쇼저 차야만 돼 또지만 되네 선토고 말와 저 교지 망보시고지 소네 사추메롱 남과 동사 라 기부 감주 대배체서 사추메롱 남과 남시셔라 남과 세대 고 동자들 쓰고라 남과 딱과 세대 쓰고 말해 부가 남과세 그래서 우당서 동자 거로 강변의 우당서면이 시도라 자고 깨지깨진 요도요래 깨지깨진 요도면은 그 주사바사바야 깨고 말와 주사바사바야 깨고요래 또 지만데다 남사치 레드도 미션부터 membership도 어디 손자 되나시는 사마 그 주단 깨지 대신 요르고요라 알아서 요라바디 통근 마도 참 통고요 말와 미기셰버 싱가르지네 당고 세버차셔 다야께 온 라바라바 통그래 요라바디 통그래 이 통으로 단 깨지 요라된 아주 소르게요 말와 이 쪽이요래 깨지 요요래스 깨지 만주나네 가서 요르스네 자와 제토고 말을 돼 말을 깨지 요아체니 자와 제고래스 요라 맹게지는 내가 제토고 말을 땅보다가 돼야 되더라 어디 질렀네 된다 그래 야
So here again, it is in dependence upon kind of momentary causes that we give rise to effects that are similarly momentary. Things are constantly disintegrating moment to moment. There's no sort of static, nothing that can remain in the sense of being permanent and unchanging. But rather, causality is such that it is momentary. That things are constantly sort of disintegrating. And so for some non-Buddhists, they would think think like, well, how is it possible for things that are momentary like that to bring about any kind of result? How can we possibly talk about karma working or past and future lives or have a sort of continuity of anything if things are momentary, if they're just sort of changing moment to moment to moment? But in response to that, the Buddhists would actually assert that it is only because things are momentary that they can bring about some kind of cause. It is precisely because they aren't sort of static and permanent that one can have efficacy, any kind of result coming from its proper sort of cause. So if we take, for example, like electricity is not something that is static. It is something that is changing moment to moment to moment. But it is the case that we can use electricity to power a light, to turn on a light, and use that light for reading and so forth. And although that is not static, it is something that is changing moment to moment to moment. And the current of electricity that is going to that light bulb is something that itself is momentary and is not permanent or static or remaining in any kind of way. We can still, due to the sort of continuity of that particular result, that light, we can use it to read books and see things and so forth. So here, there is a verse from Aryadeva's 400 about the kind of fact that our life is something that is momentary. Right now, we are alive, and it is only due to being momentary, really, that we are alive. We can see more easily how it is that our mind is changing moment to moment. But we don't have this sort of sense, we don't realize actually the way in which we are momentary. Our life is momentary. So here, we generally, all of us have a sense of kind of like permanence, like we remain the same day to day even. But when we actually sort of look and examine, it is only because of our body and mind being composed of various elements that are themselves impermanent and momentary that we can speak of being alive. We need to have this kind of constant change and movement. We can see that we need to breathe, we need to eat. Even if we say have something like our blood isn't pumping for one moment, we're not able to stay alive. We are composed of these 6 elements, again, those being earth, fire, water, wind, empty space, and then consciousness. Again, so when we talk about empty space, I mean, think about we need to have those sort of spaces within our body to be able to fill our lungs and so forth. So there's so many various causes and conditions, moment to moment to moment, that are necessary for for us to be alive. Yet we don't recognize that. We don't recognize that we are in fact momentary. We tend to see ourselves as sort of static and unchanging. Now we're maybe able to observe those coarse kinds of impermanence sort of change over a longer duration of time. But really, we don't normally recognize or understand the way in which we are actually changing moment to moment to moment, that we have, that we are momentary, and that our very life is only possible because it is momentary.
Oh yeah. The next salute jangba so china jingobo gang chi yoba tamje ta ganga chi borwa tan the salute jangba sarmado. Rangi gyujin chada cheba, rangi gyu nyeren gyu dan ken lenji chiken, ane chada cheba chashe mambu yongen soro chame yomardo. Chada cheba dan gyurwa chen, kechi gyurunge, gyurdo chengi jang. Gyurwa chengi gyujin na sokba tume sokba le, tene keba inbe se, on rebu kandeshi kena nyeren dan lenji chiken sokba, gyurwa chengi pewa dan dribala sokba chawa chengi, gyurachene ni debudi kekores sokbachige imbe ane chinage ngobo nam rankewa nayase chi ngobo inada nange kansaga gyujitebe ngobo inada ro chi ne jinji den seshin na sela sokba tendo la sob karinada nange ni kansaga sola sokba da soada dushi lula sokba kalecha ne ruda chinage ngobo nam rangi kewa naya chame chigyando kewa mesela 차산이 시주맹게 코라치 장장게 랑주 톰도 수케야치 요마레소라 시릭베 차도마 촉바 코나케베세 코나리아 촉바도 차셰 망부시 응게시 네바도 깨고레서라 차셰 시릭 담도 망부시 시릭베 차도마 촉바 코나케와 임베세 데비차 가야 다시 촉바라 메데시 마덴바라 저전 그 차시 망부셔도 차시 뜻을 때내네 봐 다고로 봐 행동을 버지네 그 차시 망부여라 자다 직별로마다 박바다 차시 뜻을 가져가지 거라 뜻을 때내 안에 네 행동을 해서 봐 다고로도 강바르지네 차시 망부 배 사바다 자다 망부셔요라 뜻을 때내 안에 네 강바르에서 봐 다고로 봐 대참로 강바샤야르마도 뒤나네 찍면지네 강반디르세야지 요 말도 지리베 차두마 속바 코나케와 힘베 제부 가야 랑게 dak시 속발라 때네 dak시스도 그 셈레 차례 당부 철시 지와라 어딜 dak시스 거라 그나 거래지 통화서는 거대 철시로 어디 강바시 도삼은 바다요다 기고래지 통배나다 어디 안에 도가네시 토르지 통배나다 발하르지네 고다 나마다 지지 수르 직ton 어디들에서 바다기도 어딜 dak시다 딱 쫓으라 dak시스도 당부 철시들에 자신만 보여라 거라 들레테는 어디 발하르세로 디미르세로 바다로 대참지 코미이 바샤고르도 어디서 계속도 dak시를 때네 딱 봐서 샤고르세요 가야 dak시 쪽발라 메드시 dak시 쪽발라 때메 그 마덴바라 랑갱오 니베 구가메 랑갱오 데라 투구마레스거도 차실라 땡지 딱바 잠을 샤고르마도 딱바 잠 많이 게 지내지 세는 게 이거 진짜요 말했는거도 야 어디 진도나
So then, therefore, all external and internal composite things, again, rice seedlings, people, thoughts, are produced in dependence on an aggregation of their multiple and varied causes and conditions, which are specific to each thing, composed of parts and ever changing. So here, again, whatever kind of thing it is, and we've used an example of like a rice seedling or rice sprout, but whatever sort of internal or sort of external things in the external world, or the kind of internal things, the person, the feelings, and so forth, come about due to an aggregation of causes and conditions. And we have then something that is designated or imputed in dependence upon its basis of imputation. So when these things are produced, whatever composite thing it is impossible for them to be produced as singular partless things. Again, when we have something like, you could take, for example, a tree, we designate tree on the collection of various parts of like a stalk and the sort of bark and the leaves and the branches and so forth. It's not just like one thing. It's rather a collection of various kind of parts that we then designate tree, or like a house. When we designate something as a house, that is the extent of its existence. If you then try to look within those various parts, within that basis of designation, it's impossible to find the thing so designated. So here it says, since any effect is produced only from an assemblage of multiple and varied parts, it is impossible for it to come into being without depending or relying on a collection of parts, which is its basis of imputation. So here this term basis of imputation, like for example, when we have something like a house and the collection of the various walls and windows and all of that, that is the basis of imputation. Or like for a cow or an oxen, you know, the collection of those various parts that we then identify as being a particular thing. So you have the basis of designation, that collection of parts, and then the thing which is designated or imputed on it. So this is only, sort of, again, any effect is produced from an assemblage of multiple and varied parts, and it is impossible for it to come into being without depending or relying upon that collection of parts, that basis of imputation.
Oh yeah. 대부 교례 된주기 개발했어요. 당외 마와도 저게 대부 교례 때는 계시그라 텐데 켈링 게 도와. 근데 개발 tenjuwadan 개발 캠에 도와서 용거라. 대부 교례 된주 개발했어. 오늘 ngöbo mawa 남비자서 ngöbo mawa 수도 치르바 강가 도르다 ngöbo 템바투바 마와. 랑위네 투바 마와. 랑가 친 템바투바 마와. 텐담바투바 마와. ngö mawa 시거라. Oh, Tinea, Chiribata Nangbe, Tutan Dote Bata, Ra, Chita Mawata, Semzambala Sobata Zungra. Onangoma Nambican, Jebu Kula Temper de Bese, Jebuti Kula Tengure, Kellingerno. Jujinla Madebe Round Tulu Mebandeva, Judan Ken la Market, Judan Ken la Madeve, Debucora Kanjatas, Kivatis, killing Meduas, Rawan to be killing Meduas, the killing Marwa. Judan Ken Mogoche, Koran Rawan Kiba de Sigmarta. That the United Carsora. Jambimba Gainan, the answer double Laguara, Jujim Mogoche, Koran, Kehumbersia. Duce tendin duce la tengu ata kebarchi kebake medoa kera tendi de mambusha de solution bendola sobe kapso ke chimbuche songu de ti konzu ke kele do chipare do asna china se sutra bachura ngobo mawa nam gine ngobo na gyumeba ngobo mawa dozu kanga rangune tuba rangi chengi tuba tamba tuba kele gyara Don't tambachi tugure some seju tang or the Gumane Keon Gudusa Kona, Russian Keon, the Tamba Truvarane. Yana Gumini Ken, Ovuna Gumeba Kyoade. Yana Mitebe Junjine Cheba Bola Soba, one Juda, Tuichameda, Tutagwada, Saveran Chisola Soba, Tezo Keba Ese, Tezu Tembatruba Dugure, Debukio de Tembatruba Dura. Kibu Tagwe Jule Kyoan Debada, Kibu. Takwashati Debuke Soba. The Dajan so do Shagina. No Mawa Zogaya, no Julekio, Judan Kenlet and Kio Mawa to so duna, Tashi Kivan al Dudu Resogara. Juna Rangi Tangi Chibe Juleke Takese. So Shirokas in the Talim, my Shalem, Nila, my Kumim, Ubukanda Kana, Kyoanam, Yoma Sugua. Jaza Chitambuta Tagi Randa Tangi Chigwe Jule gave a taki killing gore. The Rangwene Truba, Tontambo Trubacan. Jebuna Rangwene Trube Gushan give a Shangis. I Shandagi Shangi killing gore. Rangwene Trube Gushan Latene. Ya Tontambo Trube Gushan Latene, Debushan Kigrese. On the Shangis said Kebatu Yan, Kebatu Sunzu Madrani Yora. Kebakasha on the Shangis said. Jushan Shannon to Tondambata to the Chagumares, Jushan and Debushan Kyo Mass, Tondam Chebe Segura, Jushan and Debushan Kyo Mares, Tondambaki Rangwini to be Jushan Shaumares, Chisonga Bada to the Rangwini to be Jushan Lekua, Shangi said, killing about Chagures. Oh, Nicola Tagida, Debuna Rangwini to be Jushan Leki Shangida. Nigale Kyota, Tagi, and Shangi, the Chiruato Sigurdo. Tagi Shangi, Nialingi, Julie Kibeshan, Takis, Langis, Shalatan, Kibeshan, Shangis, and Tagi Shangi, and the Sutos of the Ragadim to Nigale Kyo answer. Jumeba, Chirile Kyo and Dova, Kambimba, and Jumene, Kora Shinjitsu, Ramune Suta, and Gorsigora. Jutedal and Debuki. Mirunga Kondo shares in Batari Imbes. O Tinde, Rangone to be Jushanda, Tagi, Shangi, Niga, Jumili, Kyo, Shinal, Madibe, Kyo, Homar, Tishigadi, Tondamba to Rangone to be Sugi, Kyo, Kelling, you are the essay. Murmave, Debutula, Temper Mawa, Dranas, Debutula, Teniketa Sigro. Mayan, the dog and do Sunam. Timbe Judan Kela Tene Kive, Tenchidar Tola Neva, Shin Joshi Batadal Medus. Tandal one is an Kachi Jurachin Roa, Ne Rangwine Trube Tombe, Rawando Trube Sugimeba, attended Kyoate Shashin Guamaris, Rangwine Chike Wudu Satundamba, Kyo Yogure, some Benicashe, Daki, Kasha Shangi, Nigalika, Kumilika, and the Kelling Goresha. The dog in Duzunam la Timbe Kula ten and Debu Keve, Tenchidor Tola Nebashi, the Tala Meadows, or Consul Joshi, but the Consul Yomares, Ya Tibatula, Manduchasa.
So, Then here, we turn to this section on different interpretations of how an effect depends on its causes. So it says here that since even essentialists, so those who say that the identity of individual phenomena relies on their possessing a fixed essence or nature, assert that effects arise in dependence on their causes, they must ultimately deny any mode of existence that is independent of causes and conditions, just as consequentialists do. So here, again, essentialists are those that say that the identity of individual phenomena relies on their possessing a fixed essence or nature. This can take on various forms, but even within the Buddhist schools, we see like the particularists or like the Vaibhashikas, the Sutra school, the mind-only school. They assert a dependent origination, but they also assert this kind of fixed identity or true existence. And so someone might have this kind of question, well, just like the consequentialists assert dependent origination, so too do those essentialist schools. So how do consequentialists differ from essentialists with respect to their understanding of the dependent arising of composite phenomena? So here, again, there are different sorts of views that are taken by these essentialists. Different essentialists make various assertions with regard to composite phenomena. Some say that things arise causelessly. So there are those, again, like the Charvakas or those types of sort of hedonist kind of schools that believe things arise causelessly. Whereas others assert various discordant causes, such as a divine creator, a partless particle, a permanent principle called time, a principle nature, or a permanent being. So all of those sort of positions can be subsumed into these four alternatives. This, again, being production from self, that effects arise from causes that are the same nature as themselves. Production from other, effects arise from causes that exist in and of themselves. Production from both self and other, and production from no causes. So here, again, those sorts of essentialists would assert that production needs to fall into one of these four. We see there are those that assert like self-production, like the Samkhyas and so forth, or things coming from a sort of principal nature and dissolving back into that. And there are others who would assert that there is a production from an other, an inherently existent other. Now, this, again, is sort of refuted by the famous line from Nagarjuna's Fundamental Verses on Wisdom, where he says that there's nothing whatsoever that arises from self, from other, from both self and other, or from neither self nor other. So here we should take that and understand that as refuting all four of these kinds of types of production. Now, there are those who would say that one needs to apply the kind of qualifier of ultimately. They would say that things are produced from another, but not an ultimately existent other. Now, for Lama Tsongkhapa, he really applies that kind of qualification of an other, things are not produced from an other that exists from its own side. So here, again, this neither of these, none of these four modes of production are accepted as valid, even without the kind of qualification of ultimate, although from its own side. So that production of effects via these four alternatives is unfeasible, has already been explained above. Therefore, although essentialists say that effects arise in dependence on their causes, they do not, in fact, assert how effects do arise, how they arise from causes that are concordant with them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they tandem this old Chesonga about and Chiriba to Zuta. Chiriba to Zuta Basanje from Dende, Cocaling Yomardo, oh, Sanje da Takba Meva Songisera, and it you didn't say Babola so what is a Meva Songisa. And it's Gobokanga, Kiji Sigara, the Zukonzo Kavio Mardo, Shende Baside, Kavio Marta. Oh, the Zoga Nidra, she may Rangshiki meba de mesoni soma to na rangshiki yore tadamba yore temba yore sede kurazu tembe lure kamendu songyora chizongaba ki tendre jebane gudwa gangshi kyodan shendeba mare tambude mongbe trendo sonwa yesara mongbe trendo sonwa yesara ko ta yesara ta ge nesula mongba jiden cheba nesula mongba ta mongba mambu yordo kanga nondri cheje mongba ge shanwa de son yogbu na shi cha de sha songyora teho na shi mongbe trendo sonwa ye gangshi kyodan shendeba tamba sanje chumden de kyodan shendeba pe ko kawo mar shene o ta de nastik wala rese ta takwa mese ke tini chigden cheba mese ke takwa mese tu takwa mese ke se nastik wala sigdwa meba ma rese kanshi kyodan mongbe tendo sonwa ye kanshi kyodan shendeba tini kare te ranshi mebe ta meso gyula sarchi yose kozo ke rangshi mese de so tukuma rese rangshi yore te damba yore temba tuba yore sigora tila ngo tsare ke yo maru yamtsaya ke yo maru koransi tembe luri esi wara meso gyula tsarchi yose ta dile duwa di chitra mawa dan tode pa dan semzang pa tozo temba sanje chomde deke chinju resi wara tanda tezo ke meso gyula kyoje sonje cheben zo tenen zhonga kaya lan desi sanje chomde deke songbe songin zo tabu pe sa shushu yoge tenjin drepan juwan yesi kaya langi la se gordo kyoje sonje cheben zu tenen juwan kaya lan tongye ngaro meso ba tela kongo sa jo rangshin ki trube tongba re se te meso ne rangshin ki yo se kaya langi de tongye ngaro meso tela kongo sa ba te yamsen re se ngo chabu re se meho ba re se gordo chanda ya tichi kyo na.
So here, then again, those who are following after, again, there are outsiders who don't accept the kind of system presented by Buddhists. They don't accept the idea of selflessness or that there is no creator and so forth. So for those who are really outside of the system of the Buddha's teachings, as Gelama Tsongkhapa has said in his verses on the praise of dependent origination, being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you, what is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of no intrinsic existence? So those kinds of schools that assert that there is some kind of intrinsic existence, or they're really enslaved by their various views that are totally in opposition to the views of the Buddha, it's not really astonishing that they are unable to bear the sound of there being no intrinsic existence. It's not something that they can really fathom or get behind. But continuing into the next verse, he then addresses those who claim to be followers of the Buddha, but yet are not able to accept emptiness. So here it continues saying, but having accepted dependent origination, like those lower schools, the Vaibhashikas, the Sutra school, the mind-only school, the precious treasure of your speech, this thing that is so precious, that is like a treasure of the Buddha's speech, having accepted that dependent origination, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this I find amazing indeed. So it is more sort of strange or amazing that those who accept the idea of dependent origination are there not able to bear with the idea of emptiness. This is sort of, that is something that he expresses his amazement at. So we will stop there for today as we've run out of time.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice in and on life, may I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah, well, teacher.
Thank you so much, Genren Rinpoche, for such beautiful, profound teachings. And thank you, Christina. Without you, we would not, Katrina, sorry, without you would not be able to understand a word of this beautiful teaching. So thank you, and we'll see everyone next week.